Cars, Alex.
Can you talk to me while we
missed it.
How about Miss Kim? What does Miss Kim drive? What kind of car? And how Miss Jessica?
Such a pretty daughter.
Yeah, remember the Munsters? That show, the Munsters? Remember the blonde lady that was on there? Because she was pretty, she wasn't like the rest of the family.
Pontiac G5.
What does David have? From what state?
Texas.
What about
Max?
what does Max have?
Yeah, we have pretty
Pontiac
kids.
sedan.
Johnny Glidewell.
A homemade kid.
Oh, I know.
Nissan
My Aunt Gladys
Sentra.
used to
How
say
about
that.
Amma?
Oh, Lisa's mom and grandma.
Lexus
One was a model, one was a
RX-350.
Broadway
Papa.
dancer.
BMW X3.
So you got that gene pool going on.
Uncle Randy.
Nissan Versa.
How about
What does
No,
Angela
you have to
have?
keep her that way on the inside.
Pontiac
Oh, should be that way
Montana.
naturally.
Aunt Linda?
With that
Lincoln
personality, I
Town
think
Car.
Uncle Rudy?
Adorable.
Jeep Wrangler.
How about Chip?
Ford Explorer.
How about Gina?
Honda Civic.
What's Gina's little baby's name?
Corcher.
What's
Yeah.
Alex's middle name?
Corcher.
And how about Jeffrey? What kind of car does Jeffrey drive in Alabama?
Volvo sedan.
What kind of car did I used to drive?
Mustang.
What kind of car did Dad used to drive?
Camry.
Who owns a Camry now?
John Casa.
And where does John Casa live?
Bluebell.
And what happened to Kevin's Mustang? Who bought it?
Sam.
And where does Sam live?
Yeah, and I don't know.
Creep.
Maybe you can
Oak,
call her.
Wentzville.
And how about Papa's old car? What was that?
Porsche.
Who bought that?
Randy Smith.
Yeah. And how about what's Papa's new car?
And I told him.
BMW X3.
Yeah. Any more you can think of, Kevin? How about your teachers? How about who's your teacher, Miss? Who's your fifth grade teacher?
Mrs. Reed.
What does she drive?
Mazda 6.
Who is your fourth grade teacher?
Mrs. Siegel.
What does she drive?
Toyota RAV4.
Who's your third grade teacher?
Mrs. Walters.
What does she drive?
Chrysler Sebring convertible.
Who's your second grade teacher?
Mrs. Buxton.
What did Mrs. Buxton drive?
Jeep Wrangler.
Who's your first grade teacher?
Mrs. Steck.
What did she drive?
Acura Coupe.
How about your first grade teacher? Or your kindergarten teacher?
Mrs. Downs.
What did she drive?
Toyota Highlander.
How about your other kindergarten
Mrs.
teacher?
Meek.
What did she drive?
Ford Focus.
How about Mr. B, the principal?
Ford F-150.
How about the assistant principal? What's his name?
Mr. House.
What's he drive?
Chevy Silverado.
How about resource? Who's your resource teacher?
Mrs. Reynolds.
What did Miss Reynolds drive?
Pontiac Vibe.
And how about your fifth grade resource teacher?
Mrs. Williams.
What'd she drive?
Honda Civic Coupe.
Fourth grade resource teacher.
Mrs. Balmer.
What'd she drive?
Chevy Uplander.
What's her first name?
Kim.
How about your third grade resource teacher?
Mrs. Balmer.
What's Mrs. Balmer's first name?
Kim.
And how about what's her husband do?
Mr. Balmer.
What does he work at?
Firehouse.
How about your second grade resource teacher?
Mrs. Diebold.
And what's her first name?
Mona.
Is she your old teacher or new teacher?
Old teacher.
What kind of car does she drive?
GMC Envoy.
And how about your first grade resource teacher?
Mrs. House.
And what kind of car did she drive?
Honda Odyssey.
What did you see her at Wendy's or what restaurant did you see her?
Culver's.
We saw Culver's. And how about your kindergarten resource teacher? What did she drive?
Mrs. Whitehead.
What did Mrs. Whitehead drive?
Honda Odyssey.
And do you have another resource teacher in first grade?
Mrs. Robin Smith.
What did she drive?
Mini Cooper.
It's pretty good. And yet, how about the nurse?
Mrs. Billings.
What'd she drive?
Toyota Camry.
How about Mrs. Librarian? What's her name?
Mrs. Mack.
What'd she drive?
Chevy Equinox.
How about the lunch lady? What's her name?
Mrs. Craig.
What does Mrs. Craig drive?
Chevy Uplander.
How about the art teacher?
Mrs. Pearson.
What'd she drive?
Subaru Outback.
How about Mr.
Roadie.
What's he drive?
Unicorn.
How about the other music teacher?
What does
Mrs.
Mr.
Wolf?
Brody drive?
Unicorn.
Unicorn.
He's messing with them.
He drives a unicorn?
Yes.
He does. Probably is.
That's a Ford or something.
Yeah.
Who makes a unicorn?
Ford.
Ford. Go look it up. All right, now Alex, how about your gym teacher for PE? Who's your TE teacher? Mr. Grove? What's he
Yes.
drive?
Ford Taurus.
And how about the one that Brett doesn't like, the lady? What's her name?
Mrs. Buford.
What does she drive?
Chevy Silverado.
That's right. Any other teachers? How about any other teachers? How about
Music.
Mrs. Wolf.
She already did that one. How about Mrs. Dorothy Smythe?
How about Mrs.
Chrysler Sebring.
Mrs. Slinker?
Ford Escape.
Talking about?
Talk about
What are we talking about?
cars.
We're done on YouTube. Thank you, Alex.
Yeah.